Hello everybody, this is Dr. Novak. In this video, I'm going to be talking about CEC, which only stands for Cation Exchange Capacity. Now, Cation Exchange Capacity of Substrate. Now, in this hobby, as things have progressed, a long time ago when we, for example, had lights, all we cared about was the luminous output. Today, everybody's saying, well, what's the par? What's the par? The par meters are very expensive, ranging in about $300 a meter. And who's going to buy a par meter just to check out a lighting system you have to use it like once and then put it away for $300? Well, the CEC capacity of a substrate is just as important to hobbyists as them saying, I want to know what the par is of light in the aquarium. The trouble is you never hear anyone really talk about CEC capacity of substrates. So in this video, I'm going to get into this a lot more about CEC capacity. Now, you're not going to believe that in this hobby, most hobbyists will buy the worst substrate out there with the worst CEC capacity to it. That's absolutely terrible when you think about it. But the only reason they're buying a substrate with the worst CEC capacity to it is because it's inexpensive. But we should be looking more into substrates a little bit deeper, just like we're trying to look into lighting systems that use par, because now it's a new tool that we can use to find out the substrate that we are using or the substrate that we are going to buy has the capacity and high enough CEC capacity to do the job of which we want. In the video, I'm going to get into that. I'm going to get into why we're looking at CEC capacity, why it is so important in any aquarium, plus planted aquariums. It's very important. And we're going to get into how it's measured. Okay, it's not measured with equipment, of course, that hobbyists can buy. So forget that. You can't measure CEC capacity. But I am going to get in there and tell you some things. Another thing is, if you're watching this video and you're over in India or you're over in Thailand or something, I'm also going to give you products that you can use in your countries that have a very high CEC capacity. And I think you'll be happy to hear that these substrates will be perfect for what you want to use them for, and I will explain why. So anyhow, all that is coming up next, so stay tuned. Okay, let's get into this. This is the experiment I did, and I'm showing you the top basket that you see with the Wendenti in it is nothing but 100% kitty litter. The one on the left side that you're looking at is with the soil, the Miracle Grow soil with a lot of nutrients in it. And of course, the one on the right that you see was the one where I messed up and kind of threw that plant into shock. But believe it or not, it is recovering. It's doing a great job. And in fact, if you look closely at that pot at 6 o'clock and at 3 o'clock, it's already starting to send out new runners and new plant shoots. So even though the plant kind of melted some, it didn't melt all the way, and therefore it's looking pretty good at recovering. I bet you in a few months' time you'll never know that that plant had ever had a problem with it. So this is the plant up close that uses the soil, and it looks good. There's, no doubt that the plant is looking good, but What this video is about is the CEC capabilities of your substrate. And we are going to find out and get into that, where the CEC capability is just the Cation Exchange Capability, is the ability of the material to absorb positive charged nutrients and ions. Now, the water column itself is positively charged. So our aquariums and our ponds are electrically charged, read in millivolt readings. The charge is very minute, and therefore, like this picture shows here, it shows you that the water column is basically positively charged. The air above it, the aquarium or the pond, would be negatively charged. And then you got the substrate, which is then negatively charged. And then it makes the positive, negatively charged, which would be in the plenum. These are your oxidizers. Oxidizers are positive and negatively charged. That's the reason we make a plenum. Okay, so when we talk about the CEC capacity, when we make a plenum, we are trying to create a high CEC capacity for our aquariums. That's the reason you're making a plenum, is to aid in the taking in of positively charged ions. And here's a picture of a BCB basket, how it works. You can see it's basically negatively charged. The outer side or the pond would be positive, some negative charges, and it attracts those ions inside there. Let's see, the CEC, all it really means is the substrate, the ability of the substrate to hold nutrients and make them available to the plant roots and to bacteria. And this aids in plant growth. CEC measures the amount of nutrients, more specifically positively charged ions, which a substrate can hold onto, store for future use by aquatic plants. So that is what CEC basically means. The CEC, while it means that the substrate will hold nutrients and make them available to plant roots and bacteria, it doesn't indicate the amount of nutrients the substrate contains. So that would be like dirt, for example. It's not measuring what is in that substrate, like all the nitrates and phosphates and everything. It just is trying to figure out what it contains. Now, in order to find out this, the CEC of substrates, you have to use a ICP OES system and an analyzer system. And that's how you would analyze for your CEC of your substrate. And milliequivalent is what it's called. It would be milliequivalent per 100 grams, which would, that's how you would list it. You would say it has, let's say, 100 milliequivalents per 100 grams. Okay, the higher the number, the better the CEC, the better it's able to take in positive ions. So now, since we understand that, this is not a test that you would do at home. This is more for agricultural. This is something more for universities. This would be available, not something we would have. So when we talk about the CEC, from the tests I conducted, I'll give you a few of my research, what I found out, okay, on the CEC of different substrate materials that we tested. Just for example, let's take the CEC of sand, milliequivalent per 100 grams of sand. Sand's very popular, right? Everybody agrees to it. Everybody's buying it. They're buying pool sand. They're buying play sand. I use sand in my tank that I set up for the bettas, and that was beach sand, which is a little larger granule than the other two sands I just mentioned. Okay, the CEC capacity, which is the milliequivalent per 100 grams, is less than 1 milliequivalent per 100 grams. Less than 1 for sand. That's all sand. Gravel also falls in the same category. It's very, very poor in CEC, meaning that for it to attract the positive ions, it's going to be a very poor worker for you. It is the most bought substrate, only because it's inexpensive, but hobbyists don't understand that it is very, very poor on attracting positive ions out of the water column, which is basically positively charged. So clays, different kinds of clays, they start at about 30 milliequivalents per 100 grams, all the way up to maybe 50 to even higher than that, maybe even 70. Different clays will act differently. For example, if you get zeolite, for example, is over 100 milliequivalents per 100 grams. So zeolite's even higher yet. That would make sense, right? Zeolite is designed to absorb ammonia, which is positively charged. That's why they use it. But it can be used as a substrate for those people who are in India or something like that. Using zeolite is a good alternative than trying to get kitty litter or oil dry or something like that, because it's more readily available. It must be in a small enough size to equal that of baked kitty litter. But it's very good. A lot of people would say, well, the zeolite becomes exhausted. Well, no, if it's used correctly, zeolite will aid for plants, so you can put plants in it, and it will also aid in bacteria growth, because it will also give bacteria food source. We all know that bacteria uses negative and positive ions to feed upon. Some of the ions may be positive, some may be negative, but that's what you're providing if you use these clays. Now, we use kitty litter because it has a crystalline structure, much like that of zeolite. This crystalline structure actually attracts the positive ions out of the water column, which is good for us. Other substrates that we tried just didn't do as good. Now, this doesn't mean that you can't get higher CEC capacities using things like, let's say, dirt, or what do they call it, humus, soils, dirt. Okay, because those CEC capacities that can go up to 250 milliequivalents per 100 grams. And right away, I know people are saying, well, that's great. That's the reason we use dirt. But they also may contain unwanted elements that may be detrimental to the aquarium and its environment. These may leach out into solution, plus the fact dirt doesn't hold its capacity of nutrients for very long. It has a tendency to want to release those nutrients very quickly. That's why you hear people complain about dirt after a while. It kind of peters out, it becomes exhausted. Even in the tests that you're, like the picture you're seeing here, the top left-hand corner, that is the dirt. It doesn't look better than the basket that just uses 100% kitty litter. It's because the dirt is already becoming exhausted, where the kitty litter is constantly taking in nutrients. Another thing that I did different here is, because if you look at the pot on the left-hand side, the reason it looks so much different than the back pot is because this is the way people will put their substrate in an aquarium. You put it in a closed system. So because nutrients that are in the pot can be used up, how is it going to get new nutrients in there? See, there's the big problem. The pot in the back that's black, the basket, the open cell basket, which is open on all sides, the bottom and all, is able to get nutrients in a lot more easier and attract ions. In fact, it's able to do it so efficiently that you will see a lot of plants popping out the sides of the basket. New growth from roots popping out the sides. This is exactly what we're trying to do with a BCB, or we are trying to do this with a plenum. We're trying to have fluids move freely through the substrate slow enough to aid the plants so they can take a cation and anion and out of the water body. Because a lot of people say, well, if all you're doing is tracking cations, what about the anions? Well, the anions are coming in to the plenum because you're removing fluids. So any negative anions that are coming in will be available to the plant roots. The plant roots will go in there and exchange one ion for another ion. When it attracts like an ammonia ion, it will take that ion and also take a negatively charged ion. So you're using both ions with plants. You're making the flow of water move slowly, but it has the availability. That's why in the beta tank, when I redid it with the kitty litter and put a plenum in there, I've had no problem with algae at all, like I did when I just placed sand in there. Now the sand was the exact same depth as the kitty litter that was in that container. The only difference is I'm using a plenum versus first time I set it up, there was no plenum. All I did was have algae problems. It would make sense, right? Think about it. If you can't get the nutrients out of the water column, and if your plants can't take in the nutrients yet because they have a root system, a vascular system like a root system, how are they going to get their food? If it's being hindered, if it's being shocked, it needs to grow roots and establish itself. Well, during the meantime, you have these ions, negative and positively charged ions, starting to build up in the water column, and therefore you're going to have algae problems or cyanobacteria problems because you're building up too many nutrients in the water column itself. So one way of solving this problem that people do is water changes, trying to get the nutrients out of the water column. This is very common with brand new aquariums. We see it all the time. They'll go through different phases of algae problems, like brown algae, hair algae, string algae. But once the tank is broken in, that's what we're hoping to achieve, is to have the water flow into the substrate and lock in these nutrients. That's why when I redid the beta aquarium with the kitty litter, no problems at all. So this is going to show you that like you have this fluoride here, and this is just what somebody sent me. I think this is from Australia if I'm not mistaken, but like let's take fluoride for example. It is a clay, but it doesn't say for a clay what the CEC capacity of that clay is. Okay, it could be very low, it could be very high. It depends on the crystalline structure of that particular clay. Is it capable of attracting the positive ions like it's supposed to? Okay, so you do understand a little bit now why manufacturers are trying to desperately make products that will attract the positive ions out of the water column. And they're desperately trying to do this without using like kitty litter, oil dry, one of those substrates or zeolite or something, because they want your money. And of course it's just going to pay off for them to try to make a substrate that has iron in it, and that's how they sell it to you. Oh, this has iron in it and nutrients that the root system of your plants can have. Well, that's great, but why aren't you telling the hobbyists what the CEC capacity of that substrate is? They're not telling you. It could be a 5. Because some clays have very low CEC capacity because they're not designed to really absorb positive ions. They're designed to, hold water back, like you can make a clay pond. and the clay will hold the water back so it doesn't migrate out of the pond, and you have an empty pond or lake within a month because the water seeped through the, bottom of the lake or bottom of the pond. So it's not unusual to use clay to pack around a pond instead of using a liner, and that will seal it because that clay is not designed to have a high CEC capacity. So there's little tricks that could be made to make things look better than what they are, and to say, well, look, this product has a lot of iron in it and it has a lot of nutrients for your plants, but if they're locked up inside that particular clay and it's been baked, if it doesn't have that crystalline structure like that of kitty litter, or laterite has a crystalline structure that attract the ions out of the water and keep fluids moving, it's not going to be much good. The reason you kind of make a plenum is because when you use different substrates in a plenum, which is fluids are being moved through it, because that's why you have that void underneath called the plenum, that allows water to move more freely through the substrate to bring in these ions. So we're trying to take ordinary substrate that may not be good or that high in CEC capacity and create a negative environment to attract the positive ions out of the water column. And then in the plenum, it will then have positive and negative ions, which are oxidizers, which then can go into the water column and oxidize, leaves, wood, dead fish, uneaten food, fish waste, and that's what you're creating, and this is what raises redox. So I'm not trying to get too complicated here, but yes, it does sound a little complicated. That why are we very interested in, let's say, the reading of par for lights, but nobody's really interested in CEC capacity of our substrates? Well, one thing, because sand is absolutely lousy when it comes to CEC capacity. It's terrible. And if you told people the truth, like I'm telling you, that the CEC capacity of sand is garbage, and if you don't use the sand right, it's not going to work very good for you. And that's what we're trying to create with the plenum, to try to help. Personally, I don't care for sand. I like the way the substrate looks with other things than just sand. Sand is so fine, gets in the filter, it could get in the fish's gills, stuff like that. It's just one of those things that people are using because it's cheap. It's inexpensive, and people will admit to it. I'm using sand because I have, let's say, a big tank. I don't want to spend the money on getting the right substrate, so I'm going to use sand. But you'll never hear a fish store ever say, oh, you don't need to use that. You could use actually just oil dry a kitty litter and clean it out in a net and use that. And they're never going to say that because that's dirt cheap for a substrate. But it makes an excellent substrate because of its CEC capacity is so high. It's, unbelievably high compared to sand. So in order to end this whole thing on the CEC capacity of substrates, which I've given you, when people lock in dirt, yes, it may have a high CEC capacity, but it does lose its nutrients very quickly in the water column. And this can cause problems for people, and I've heard it cause problems for people. Sand causes problems. It compacts. It doesn't allow water to travel through it very easily. Through a plenum, it helps, but this is what kitty litter looks like. It makes a very nice substrate. Plus, on top of that, it will grow your plants. The only thing you really need to add to it is iron. Now in my 90-gallon tank, which I have, the plants are growing like banshees, yet I've never really added much to it except iron. A little bit of iron every week I add to it. I don't squirt any fertilizers into it because it's getting all of its nutrients, because that tank is almost 2 years old. It's getting its nutrients through the substrate. The plants are now, because the waste has built up. It's pulling in the negative and positive ions into the substrate and makes them available to the plant roots and root hairs. Same thing is happening with BCB bag. It's attracting those ions in and making it available to bacteria. Same thing that's happening with the betta aquarium. The kitty litter is tracking the ions in, and it's getting there so the bacteria can consume it, and it makes a nice, good, clean environment. Even though the lights are on for, 13 hours a day, you don't have any of the problems with algae. Now, does this guarantee that you're never going to have algae? No, it does not. There's lots of reasons people get algae in their aquariums. New aquariums go through cycles that have to be finished out because you have an abundance of nutrients. Everything, you have to grow your bacteria. That's going to take time. I know everybody is looking for a speedy way to do everything in this hobby, but you can't just speed up Mother Nature to the point where you can have instantaneous. I try to show in my videos how you can help speed up using API, or you can use some of the other additives. Fritzone is another one you could add to a BCB basket or even to your substrate to help colonize it with bacteria. And that will help cycle your aquarium almost instantaneously. But other than that, patience is the biggest thing. So I hope you understand that kitty litter is something that I can't understand why manufacturers actually just don't take it and rebag it and rebrand it up as a aquarium substrate. I just can't seem to understand, unless there's some deal going on, I don't know, of they can't do it. Like here's the betta aquarium that uses at least 5 inches of nothing but kitty litter, 100% kitty litter. There's nothing been added to it. And I add iron to it, like 1 milliliter of iron to it once a week to help the plants. But there's no algae. Some of the plants that are in there are regrowing. Some of them have rotted away because that was in the old one with the sand, but it has recovered. So anyhow, I hope you understand a little bit about CEC. It's just as important as people saying, what's the par of lighting? Well, nobody's going to buy a par meter. Par meters are $300. Nobody's going to check the CEC capacity of their substrate. They're not going to do it. But if you did watch my last video, the guy in the United Kingdom who did some tests on 4 different substrate, people in the comments were quite surprised how well the kitty litter did. And it did that because it was tracking the positive ions out of the water column. So buying expensive substrate is really not needed. When I set up my tanks, I used what you hobbyists would use. But normally I wouldn't have. I would have set up my aquariums with 100% kitty litter. It looks nice. It cosmetically doesn't look bad. Plus the fact it's going to do a lot of work for me that I want it to do. And it's going to give me a lot less headaches with algae problems in my aquarium if I went 100% just using the baked kitty litter. Not the softer stuff, but the baked stuff. It will act as a great substrate for you. In America, I don't think we should have too much of a problem finding it, but I know people are complaining that they can't find it in certain areas. But anyway, that's about it for this video. Hope you understood it. I hope it kind of open up your eyes a little bit that kitty litter with a Plenum, like you see in this is the betta container. You can see how the air hose is already going down to make a Plenum. It doesn't cosmetically look that bad, but now we know why it works so good. Along with like Zeolite, we know why it works because it has a very high CEC capacity to attract the ions out of the water column. So this is Dr. Novak once again, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't subscribed already, and I'll try to get more educational videos out to you. But this is the reason we make a Plenum, to have our substrate work for us, to make sure it does what it's supposed to do by attracting ions out of the water column to feed the bacteria and plants. So until next time, happy fish keeping.